He never allowed anyone to enter his garage. Even his family had no idea what he was hiding there. But after his death, his niece finally decided to open the door, and what she saw inside made everyone panic. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. Rain came down in thin, steady lines that blurred the cemetery into a watercolor of gray stone and trembling umbrellas. The air was cold enough to make every breath visible, but no one spoke. A few relatives huddled together around the open grave, listening to the priest's muted voice as it faded into the hum of the wind. When the last clump of earth fell against the coffin lid, the sound was heavier than it should have been, as though it marked not only the death of a man, but the sealing of something unspoken. Mia Lane stood slightly apart from the others, her black coat soaked through at the shoulders. She wasn't crying, not exactly, but there was a hollow feeling in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Uncle Harold had never been close to anyone, yet his absence left a peculiar silence, as if something weighty had been removed from the family's fragile balance. Her mother, Karen, stood beside her, clutching a damp tissue, eyes red from both the rain and the effort to stay composed. When it was over, the small crowd drifted toward their cars. The cemetery emptied quickly, leaving only the faint tracks of tires in the mud. Karen lingered for a moment, staring at the fresh mound, and then whispered almost to herself, "He didn't deserve to die alone." Mia nodded, though she wasn't sure she agreed. Uncle Harold had chosen his solitude, everyone knew that. He had built a life behind locked doors and pulled down blinds, and for years no one had really seen him, except at rare family gatherings where he sat quietly at the end of the table, smiling at jokes he didn't quite hear. The drive back from the cemetery took them past the edge of town and into the hills where Harold's house stood. Even through the mist, the outline of the property was familiar to Mia. The sagging fence, the oak trees bending over the roof, the faint glint of the old garage door, rusted but sturdy. As a child, she'd been fascinated by that place. She used to run to it whenever they visited, hoping to peek through the dusty windows, only for her uncle's sharp voice to stop her in her tracks. "Stay out of there, Mia. That's not for you." She never understood why. The tone hadn't been angry, just edged with fear. A week after the funeral, when the condolence calls finally stopped, Karen decided they needed to clear out Harold's house. "It's time," she said one morning, folding her hands around a cup of coffee. "We can't leave it like that forever." Mia agreed. There was a strange pull she couldn't explain. Not just duty, but curiosity, a sense that unfinished things still lingered there. They arrived early on Saturday. The driveway was overgrown with weeds, the path slick with fallen leaves. When Karen unlocked the door, a wave of stale air met them, thick with dust, oil, and something metallic. The living room was exactly as Harold had left it. Stacks of newspapers, a half-empty cup on the counter, a calendar still turned to a year ago. It felt less like a home and more like a time capsule sealed away from the world. Mia moved carefully through the rooms. On the walls hung faded photographs. Harold in his 20s beside an old film camera. Harold by a lake with men she didn't recognize. Harold in a factory uniform, standing stiffly in front of a row of machines. Each picture had the same strange detail. Harold was never smiling. Even in the family portraits, his eyes seemed to look past the lens, toward something no one else could see. When Mia opened the door to the hallway leading to the garage, she stopped. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, thick with rust but unbroken. The door itself was solid oak, darker than the rest of the house, and she could almost feel the cold air seeping through the cracks around it. Karen came up behind her. "Leave that for later," she said. "I don't even know what's in there, but I don't want to deal with it today." Mia hesitated. "He never let anyone go inside, did he?" Karen shook her head. "Not even your father. He was obsessed with that place. Said he was working on something important, but he never explained what. After his wife left, it got worse. Sometimes I'd call, and he wouldn't pick up for weeks. Then he'd suddenly show up at my door with some broken radio he wanted to fix, as if nothing was wrong. The two women spent the rest of the day sorting through boxes, old clothes, and papers. As the afternoon light faded, the house seemed to close in around them. The rain had returned, tapping softly on the roof. Mia caught herself glancing again and again toward the garage door. Something about it felt alive, like it was holding its breath. By evening, they were both exhausted. Karen suggested staying the night instead of driving back in the storm. The electricity still worked, barely, and they found a few candles in the kitchen drawer. Over dinner, canned soup and dry bread, they spoke of Harold as if trying to piece together who he had really been. Karen remembered him as clever, withdrawn, and oddly secretive, always scribbling notes and collecting newspapers about politics and crime. He used to keep a notebook, she said, staring into the flickering candlelight. He wrote things down constantly. Once I asked what he was working on, and he said, "Truth takes time to ripen." I thought he was just being poetic. Later, when Karen went to bed in the upstairs room, Mia stayed awake downstairs, sitting near the old window that faced the garage. The wind was restless, shaking the branches outside. She thought about her uncle's lonely life, the locked door, the lingering sense that he'd been protecting something rather than hiding it. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, that the house wasn't watching her. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely alone. When the clock struck midnight, a faint metallic sound broke the silence. Mia froze. It came again, sharper this time, the rattle of metal against metal. She stood up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. Through the thin curtain of rain, she saw it, the padlock on the garage door swaying gently, catching the light from the porch lamp. It shouldn't have been moving. The wind wasn't strong enough. And then, for just a second, a glint of light, a reflection, like from a flashlight, crossed the yard and vanished behind the fence. She ran to the front door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The night was cold and utterly still. Only the rain whispered on the grass. She took a few steps toward the garage, her shoes sinking into the mud. The padlock hung slightly ajar, not fully closed as it had been earlier. Mia reached out, hesitated, and then gently touched it. It swung open with an easy click, as if someone had already turned the key. Her throat went dry. She turned back toward the house. Every window was dark except for one upstairs where her mother slept. Mia looked again at the lock in her hand, the wet metal gleaming in the faint light. She felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Someone had been here tonight, and whoever it was had touched the one place Uncle Harold had always forbidden them to enter. As thunder rolled in the distance, Mia stepped back slowly, locking the padlock once more and slipping the cold key into her pocket without realizing it. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe to feel safer, maybe because some instinct told her she'd need it soon. Then she returned to the house, trying not to look back. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked as her mother turned in her sleep. Mia closed the curtains tightly, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the rain until her eyelids grew heavy. But even as she drifted toward sleep, one thought circled in her mind like a whisper she couldn't silence. If someone wanted to open that garage tonight, what were they looking for? Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and in the dark yard beyond the fence, a faint light blinked once and went out. Morning came gray and muted, as if the world had been drained of color overnight. Mia woke to the faint sound of dripping water somewhere near the kitchen and the hollow quiet of an old house that hadn't known company for years. Her mother was already awake, rummaging through a box of papers in the living room, trying to make sense of the clutter Harold had left behind. The events of the night before clung to Mia's thoughts like mist. She could still picture the padlock swinging gently on its chain, the fleeting glimmer of light disappearing behind the fence. For a moment, she wondered if it had been a dream, but when she reached into the pocket of her jeans, the cold shape of the key brushed against her fingers. She slipped it back in, saying nothing. Her mother was humming faintly, perhaps to fill the silence. "We'll do one room at a time," Karen said. "I don't want to stay here longer than we have to." Mia nodded, but her gaze kept drifting toward the hallway that led to the garage. The house felt lighter this morning, though it wasn't comfort she sensed. It was more like the air after a storm, still thick with tension. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight tried to push through the clouds. Karen went upstairs to sort through the bedrooms, leaving Mia alone downstairs. The key weighed in her pocket, warm now from her hand. She hesitated only a few seconds before walking quietly to the garage door. The padlock clicked open with almost no resistance. The sound of metal against metal echoed faintly through the empty hallway. She took a deep breath and pulled the door. It opened slower than she expected, groaning like something alive that had been forced awake after years of sleep. Dust filled the air. The first thing she noticed was the smell of old film, machine oil, and the dry scent of wood that hadn't been touched in decades. Then her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she stood completely still. The garage wasn't the chaotic storage room she had imagined. Everything inside was arranged with military precision. Along the back wall, rows of metal shelves were stacked neatly with hundreds of VHS tapes, each labeled in Harold's careful handwriting. There were cardboard boxes, stacks of yellowed notebooks, and a workbench covered with tools that gleamed faintly under a layer of dust. Mia stepped inside slowly, almost reverently. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her shoes. The labels on the tapes were like fragments of another life. Lake 1987, Factory Night Shift, Riverbank, 2003 Parade, November Surveillance. Some titles sounded harmless, like family moments, but others hinted at something secret. She traced her finger over one that read, Night Delivery Restricted. It was as if Harold had built his own private archive of the world, piece by piece, year after year. On the workbench sat an old TV and a video player, both plugged into an outlet near the wall. It seemed impossible that the electricity still worked, yet a faint red light glowed on the power switch. Mia touched the screen. It was cold. Dust drifted in thin beams of sunlight coming through the small window above the desk. She felt the stillness pressing on her chest, like the air itself was holding its breath. Something glinted on the shelf above the workbench. She reached up and pulled down a single tape lying apart from the others. It had no case, no label except a scrawled message across its spine. Watch only after my death. Washab my kanon. The words were written in bold, shaky letters, the ink slightly smudged. Her pulse quickened. It was the same handwriting from the notes her uncle used to leave on his refrigerator, the same letters she'd seen on old birthday cards. For a moment, she just stood there holding it, trying to understand what kind of man left such a message. Was it a joke, a warning, or a confession? The air in the garage felt heavier now, as if something unseen had shifted the moment she touched the tape. Her mother's voice broke the silence from somewhere inside the house. Mia, are you in there? Mia nearly dropped the tape. She shoved it behind her back as Karen appeared in the doorway, squinting at the dim room. You shouldn't be in here, Karen said, her voice gentle but firm. It's all junk, honey. Just your uncle's old nonsense. You know how he was with his gadgets. Mia nodded, her heart still racing. I was just looking. Karen sighed, scanning the shelves. I told him to throw all this out years ago. He said he was recording things, important things, he claimed. But I think he was just lonely. These tapes, those cameras, maybe they made him feel like he still mattered. She touched one of the boxes, shaking her head, then smiled faintly. We'll clean it all out later. Come on, it's freezing in here. As soon as her mother turned to leave, Mia slipped the tape into her pocket. She followed her back to the house, feeling the rough edges of the plastic pressing against her leg. The rest of the day passed in slow, ordinary work packing dishes, sorting through drawers, throwing out what they didn't understand. Yet through it all, Mia's mind stayed fixed on that black cassette with its grim instruction. When evening came and Karen went upstairs to rest, Mia stayed behind, pretending to finish some paperwork. The house was quiet again, the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel enormous. She set up the video player in the living room, brushed off the dust, and inserted the tape. The machine whirred softly, then the screen flickered to life. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then an image formed, her uncle's face, pale and serious, illuminated by the weak light of a lamp. His hair was thinner, his eyes tired. Behind him, she could see the familiar background of the garage, the same shelves she'd just seen that morning. He looked straight into the camera, his voice steady but low. If you're watching this, he said, then I'm gone. The words sent a chill through her. Harold rarely spoke in life, and hearing his voice now felt like a message from beyond the grave. He leaned closer to the camera, the lens reflecting a faint glimmer in his eyes. I knew this day would come. I don't know who's seeing this. Maybe my sister, maybe Mia. He hesitated when he said her name, as if tasting the possibility. If it's you, then I need you to listen carefully. He paused, his hands folded tightly in front of him. The image wavered slightly, and for a moment his voice dropped to a whisper. The truth has a cost. You'll find things in this house you don't understand. But I kept them for a reason. I couldn't tell anyone while I was alive. They were watching. Mia leaned forward. The screen crackled, but his next words were clear. Everything I've hidden is connected. Don't trust what you see, and don't trust the people who tell you to stop looking. If you find this tape, it means they never got to me first. He gave a long, exhausted sigh, as if the weight of what he was about to reveal had followed him even into death. It started 30 years ago, he said. A mistake that turned into a crime, and a crime that turned into silence. Before he could continue, the image broke into static. The tape seemed to rewind itself a few seconds, then froze again on his face. The words, "Now the truth belongs to you," flickered across the screen as the image distorted into black. Mia stared, heart pounding, barely breathing. The sound of rain had returned outside, soft and rhythmic against the windows. She reached for the remote, meaning to stop the tape, but then something strange happened. The player clicked on its own, the tape whirring backward, then forward again, as if it had received a signal she hadn't given. The screen flashed white for an instant, and the faint outline of a shadow appeared behind Harold. Someone standing in the background, half hidden by the shelves. Before Mia could see clearly, the screen went black. She sat frozen for a long time, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. The air in the room felt colder now. She told herself it was just a glitch, some damaged section of the tape, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Something in her uncle's expression, something in the way the tape had moved on its own, told her this was only the beginning. When she finally turned off the TV, the faint hum of the machine lingered in the silence. Upstairs, her mother shifted in her sleep. The house creaked softly, like it too was listening. Mia stood, pocketed the tape, and blew out the candle on the table. In the sudden darkness, she could still hear her uncle's voice echoing in her mind. Now the truth belongs to you. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, a single drop of rain hit the metal roof of the garage with a sound like a clock beginning to tick. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky stayed the color of ash. Mia woke early, long before her mother stirred upstairs. The faint smell of coffee grounds lingered in the kitchen, mixed with the metallic scent of the old house. She didn't turn on the lights. The silence after last night's tape felt sacred, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Her uncle's words still pulsed in her mind. It started 30 years ago, a mistake that turned into a crime. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she poured. On the kitchen table lay the cassette, black and ordinary looking, yet it seemed to radiate a quiet threat. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her uncle's face, those hollow eyes and the shadow moving behind him in the flickering light of the garage. For a long time she just stared at the tape, unsure whether to play it again. But she knew she would. Whatever it was Harold wanted her to find, she couldn't turn back now. When the floorboards creaked upstairs, she hurriedly slipped the tape into her bag. Karen came down moments later, wearing an old cardigan, her face drawn and tired. "You're up early," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," Mia replied. "Neither could I. This house, it's too quiet. Feels like he's still here somehow." Karen rubbed her temples. "I dreamed about him last night. He was standing in the doorway of that garage, saying something I couldn't hear." Mia froze. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," her mother said with a nervous laugh. "It was just a dream. I suppose all this has stirred up memories. He was always secretive, even as kids. Your grandfather used to call him the Watcher, always observing, always writing things down." "The Watcher," Mia repeated under her breath. The word made her skin crawl. They spent the morning cleaning again, sorting through boxes and stacks of paper. The deeper they went into Harold's life, the stranger it became. He'd saved everything: old newspapers, police reports, yellowing clippings about accidents, disappearances, fires. It was as though he'd been tracking the town itself, building a record of every dark corner that others ignored. In the corner of the living room, Mia found a small wooden chest filled with neatly labeled folders. Most of the papers were harmless: receipts, letters, unpaid bills. But one folder, dated 1993-1994, contained photographs, grainy black and white images of a factory floor, men in hard hats, a steel staircase. On the back of one picture was a handwritten note: "Night shift. Witnessed incident. Don't trust management." Her pulse quickened. The tape had mentioned something about a factory. Harold's voice echoed in her memory. It started 30 years ago. She tucked the photos under her arm just as her mother called her from upstairs, asking for help moving a box. Mia slipped the folder into her bag beside the cassette. By early afternoon, Karen decided to rest. "I'll take a short nap," she said. "We'll finish the rest later." When she was gone, the house fell into stillness again. Sunlight pressed weakly through the windows, illuminating the dust in golden streams. Mia sat in front of the television and inserted the tape a second time. The screen flickered, hissed, then steadied. Harold appeared again, seated at the same desk, wearing the same faded shirt. This time his voice was lower, heavier, as though he had been recording for hours. "If you're still watching," he said, "you deserve to know the truth. I was part of something I didn't understand." He paused, rubbing his temples, his fingers trembling. 30 years ago, I worked for Ridgewood Steel, a local plant that supplied materials for government contracts. It was supposed to be routine recording safety footage, documenting inspections. I ran the night cameras. But one night something happened that wasn't meant to be seen. He leaned closer, his eyes darting briefly to something outside the frame, as though checking that he was still alone. It was a Thursday, February 12th. They told me to clear the tapes from the surveillance room because of a system malfunction. But when I reviewed the footage before erasing it, I saw 3 men enter the East Wing after hours. One was the foreman. The other 2 wore suits, outsiders, probably from the city. They argued with a worker, a young man named Reed. He looked scared. Then, one of the men hit him. He fell down the stairwell. They watched him fall. They didn't call for help. They dragged his body out through the loading bay and told the security guard it was an accident. Mia's breath caught. Harold's face on the screen had gone pale, his voice nearly a whisper. "I made a copy of the footage before they could destroy it. I thought it would be enough to tell the police. I didn't realize how deep it went. The station chief told me to drop it. He said if I knew what was good for me, I'd forget it ever happened." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "But I couldn't forget. They came to my house that night, said they wanted to talk. They knew I'd kept a copy. After that, my wife left, my friends stopped calling, and I started receiving calls with no voice on the other end. I've been hiding ever since." The tape flickered again, showing glimpses of papers pinned to a wall, photos connected by red string, maps dotted with circles and arrows. "I've spent the rest of my life collecting pieces of them," Harold continued. "Documents, newspaper clippings, anything they tried to bury. They run this town, Mia. The police, the council, the companies. They think no one remembers. But I do." He looked directly into the lens, his voice breaking. "If you find this, you'll find the proof somewhere in the garage. I couldn't destroy it, no matter how many times I tried. It's hidden among the tapes. Look for the box with no label." He exhaled, almost in relief, then added, "And don't trust anyone who says they knew me well." There was a pause. The hum of the tape grew louder, the image trembling slightly. Harold leaned forward once more, eyes burning with urgency. "One of them still visits your mother," he said slowly. "John Holden. Don't believe a word he says. He was there that night." The image blurred suddenly as if the camera had been struck. The sound warped, the light flared across the screen. Then faintly, Harold's final words came through the static. "If they know you're watching, they'll come. Be careful, Mia. They're still here." The screen went black. Mia sat frozen, every muscle locked. Her heart hammered in her chest. Holden. She knew that name too well. He was practically family, a longtime friend of her mother's, the man who had helped arrange the funeral, who'd carried the coffin and given Karen comforting smiles. He'd been around since Mia was little, always generous, always present. Her hands shook as she removed the tape. She didn't realize she'd been crying until a tear splashed onto the plastic casing. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air too thick to breathe. Outside, clouds gathered again, dark and low, pressing against the windows like something waiting to get in. She needed to tell her mother. But what would she even say? That Harold had accused their family friend of murder? That he had spent 30 years collecting proof of a crime everyone else had forgotten? Karen would never believe it. She'd say Harold had gone mad, that the cancer and the solitude had driven him into paranoia. A sound snapped her out of her thoughts, a faint crunch of gravel outside. She turned toward the window. Through the veil of rain, she could just make out a shadow moving by the fence, the same place she'd seen the light 2 nights ago. Someone was there watching the house. Mia held her breath, waiting, but the figure didn't move closer. It lingered, half concealed by the trees, before finally melting into the fog. The television clicked softly behind her. The screen, which had gone dark, flickered once more, showing only a few seconds of static before cutting out completely. In the empty reflection on the glass, Mia saw her own face pale, frightened, and behind it, the faint outline of the window. Outside, the shadow was gone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there wasn't finished yet. She turned off the TV, slipped the cassette back into her bag, and went to lock the front door. Her fingers were cold, almost numb. Upstairs, her mother stirred in her sleep, unaware of what the house below had begun to reveal. Mia stood for a long time in the dim hallway, listening to the old pipes groan and the wind press against the siding. Somewhere beyond the walls, a car engine started, then faded down the road. The silence that followed was absolute. When she finally lay down, the image of Harold's face lingered behind her eyelids. His last words echoed again and again, a warning wrapped in a promise. They're still here. And as the night deepened, Mia was certain she could feel it, the invisible gaze of something patient, waiting, and far too close. The next morning arrived without light. Heavy clouds hung over the valley, swallowing the horizon and muting the world into shades of dull gray. The rain hadn't stopped. It had simply turned to a slow, relentless drizzle that made the air thick and metallic. Mia woke to the sound of it tapping softly against the window, her mind still tangled in fragments of the night before. She sat up slowly, her heart beating with that same uneasy rhythm that had haunted her since she first pressed play on her uncle's tape. The name John Holden echoed through her thoughts like a curse. Downstairs, the house was colder than usual. Karen was already up, standing near the stove with a blanket around her shoulders. She smiled faintly when Mia came in. "You didn't sleep either, huh?" "Not much," Mia admitted. "I keep hearing things," Karen murmured. "The wind, I guess. Or maybe this house just makes noise. Harold built half of it himself. Who knows what creaks where?" Mia nodded but said nothing. She poured coffee, trying to act normal. She wanted to tell her mother everything, that Uncle Harold's death might not have been natural, that he had named Holden as a murderer, but the words lodged in her throat. If her mother didn't believe her, it could make everything worse. So she said only, "I'll keep cleaning the garage today." Karen looked up sharply. "That place gives me chills. Be careful in there. I don't want you hurting yourself with those old machines." "I'll be fine," Mia said softly, though her pulse was already racing at the thought. By late morning, she stood again in the doorway of the garage. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house, as if the walls themselves remembered every secret Harold had ever buried. The rows of tapes seemed to watch her, their labeled spines like silent eyes. Somewhere among them was the proof he had spoken of, the recording that had cost him his peace, maybe even his life. She began methodically, checking each shelf, each drawer, searching for something that didn't belong. Dust clung to her fingers, leaving smudges across the old wooden workbench. Most of the boxes were labeled with neat handwriting, but near the bottom shelf, she noticed one container different from the rest. A small metal box, the kind used for tools or camera reels, sealed with brittle layers of tape. It was covered with dust so thick it looked almost gray. Mia dragged it onto the table. The lid wouldn't open at first. She pried at it with a screwdriver until the tape peeled away with a dry tearing sound. Inside were rolls of film, a small rusted camera, and beneath them a folded note. Her hands trembled as she opened it. On the yellowed paper in faded ink were just 2 words. "It's her." Her breath caught. She stared into the box again, pushing the film aside, and there, wedged beneath the camera, was another VHS cassette. It had no label, no markings at all. The surface was scratched and dull, but something about its plainness made it feel heavier than all the others. She sat down slowly. The memory of her uncle's voice returned to her. "It's hidden among the tapes. Look for the box with no label." The tape in her hands was exactly that. For a moment she just held it, unable to move. Then she heard footsteps upstairs, her mother probably moving about the house. But the sound made her tense. She slipped the tape into her jacket pocket and looked around the garage one last time. Everything felt too still. Even the rain had paused, as though the world outside was listening. Inside the house, she found the same old television and video player still plugged in. Her reflection stared back from the dark screen, pale and anxious. She hesitated, glancing toward the stairs to be sure her mother wouldn't come down. Then she pushed the tape into the slot. The player hummed to life, the screen flickered, and static filled the room. After a moment, an image formed, grainy, black and white, filmed in the dead of night. A construction site or maybe a factory yard. Floodlights illuminated steel beams and stacks of crates. The camera shook slightly, as though held by nervous hands. She realized it must have been Harold himself filming. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then movement, 3 figures stepped into the frame. 2 men in suits, one wearing a long coat, the other heavy-set. Between them, a third man, a worker, younger, dressed in overalls. They were arguing, though there was no sound, only the whir of the film. The worker turned as if to run. One of the suited men struck him across the face. The image jumped as Harold must have flinched behind the lens. The worker stumbled backward, then fell. The men looked around, then dragged the body toward a truck parked in the shadows. Mia's throat went dry. The taller of the 2 men turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch his face. Even through the static and blur, she recognized him. The angular jaw, the short hair, the faint scar near the eye, John Holden. She recoiled from the screen, her heart slamming against her ribs. "No," she whispered, but the word was swallowed by the hum of the tape. Her uncle had been right. Every word of it. She pressed stop, but the machine refused to obey. The buttons clicked uselessly. The image continued to play as though it had a will of its own. Holden's face filled the frame, staring into the darkness, straight toward the hidden camera. Then abruptly the screen went white. The lights in the house flickered once, twice, then died completely. The low whine of the television fell silent. The sudden darkness was absolute. Mia froze, listening. The air smelled faintly of ozone, as though something electrical had burned. From somewhere outside came a slow, deliberate sound. Footsteps on wet gravel. Her pulse quickened. She turned toward the window. A dim glow, the color of a flashlight, swept briefly across the front yard. Someone was out there. She grabbed the tape from the player, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. The footsteps came closer, steady, unhurried. Then, a knock. Not loud, not insistent. Just a calm, measured tapping on the front door. She swallowed hard, backing away until her shoulder hit the wall. A voice followed, deep and familiar. "Mia, it's John Holden. Is your mother home?" For a moment she couldn't move. Every muscle in her body locked. The sound of his voice, smooth and steady, was the same as she remembered from family gatherings, from the funeral, from the nights he'd visited to check on her mother. But now it carried something else, a patience too deliberate, a tone too rehearsed. She didn't answer. The knock came again. "I saw the lights flicker. Thought maybe you'd lost power. I just came by to make sure you two were all right." Her throat tightened. The rain began again, drumming softly against the roof, masking the sound of her breathing. She crept toward the hallway, clutching the tape close to her chest. Her mother's footsteps sounded above slow, unaware. If she called out, Holden would know she was here. If she stayed silent, maybe he'd leave. But Holden didn't leave. After a few moments, she heard the faint squeak of the porch boards as he stepped closer to the door. The handle rattled gently. "Mia," he said again, quieter this time. "I know you're there." Her heart felt ready to burst. She backed toward the stairs. every creak of the floor beneath her feet loud as thunder. She didn't stop until she reached the top landing. From there, she watched through the narrow window that overlooked the porch. The beam of a flashlight traced slow arcs across the yard, then vanished into the mist. The sound of his car door opening broke the silence, followed by the low rumble of an engine starting. She exhaled shakily, her knees weak. But as the taillights disappeared down the road, relief didn't come. Something inside her said this wasn't over. He had come too soon, too easily, just after she'd found the tape. He knew. Somehow he knew. Mia went back downstairs and lit a candle from the kitchen drawer. Its glow flickered over the silent television. She could still feel the weight of the tape in her hands as though it pulsed faintly, alive. Outside, the rain fell harder, erasing footprints, washing away everything except the fear that now clung to her like a second skin. She locked every door and window, then sat at the table, staring at the blank screen of her phone. She wanted to call someone, the police, a friend, anyone. But who would believe her? A dead man's confession, a 30-year-old murder, and a family friend turned killer. It sounded like madness. Upstairs, her mother called her name softly, half asleep. Mia forced her voice to sound normal. "Go back to bed, Mom. I'm fine." When silence settled again, she hid the tape beneath the floorboard near the fireplace, where Harold had once stored old tool manuals. The wood creaked shut with a muffled sigh. Then she blew out the candle and sat alone in the dark, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Outside, through the veil of rain, a single car passed on the distant road. Its headlights flashed briefly through the window, lighting the room in a pale, ghostly white before fading away. Mia stared into the empty yard long after it was gone, knowing that the man who had knocked tonight would return. He had come looking for something, and she now held the only thing he needed. Sleep never came that night. Mia lay in bed with her eyes open, listening to the hum of rain against the windows and the groan of the old house as it settled into the dark. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of wood, the rattle of a loose shutter, even the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. When dawn finally came, pale and watery, it brought no comfort. The air inside the house felt heavy, like it carried the residue of something unseen. She went downstairs quietly, careful not to wake her mother, and stood by the front window. The yard was soaked, the ground a mirror of mud and puddles. The rain had stopped, but in the driveway were faint tire marks, fresh ones. They led from the gate straight to the porch, then turned sharply back toward the road. She crouched and touched the ground. The prints were shallow but recent. Holden had been here, and she was certain he would come again. Karen entered the kitchen a few minutes later, still in her robe. "You're up early again," she said, forcing a small smile. Mia nodded. "I didn't sleep." Karen began to make tea, glancing at her daughter's pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost. This place is doing something to you, sweetheart. As soon as we finish sorting Harold's things, we'll go home. A few more days, all right?" Mia didn't answer. She wanted to tell her mother everything, that Holden was not who she thought, that he had killed someone and might have killed Harold too, but the words caught in her throat. How could she convince her mother without proof she could safely show? The tape was hidden beneath the floorboards, and even thinking about it made her stomach twist. After breakfast, Karen started making phone calls about the house and the estate. She mentioned that Holden would stop by later that evening with some legal papers. The words struck Mia like a blow. "He's coming here?" "Yes," Karen said, not noticing her daughter's alarm. "He's been helping with the probate forms. You should thank him for being so patient. He's doing all this out of kindness." Mia felt cold spreading through her chest. "Mom, maybe we don't need his help. We can handle it ourselves." Karen frowned. "What's wrong with you? He was your uncle's friend, mine too. Harold trusted him." But Harold hadn't trusted anyone, not really. The message on the tape was still burned into her mind. Don't trust anyone who says they knew me well. The day passed slowly. The clouds thickened again, turning the sky the color of pewter. Mia busied herself with meaningless chores, her mind racing. She kept checking the clock, waiting for the hour she dreaded. When dusk arrived, a low hum of tires on gravel made her stomach tighten. Through the window, she saw Holden's car roll up the drive. black, gleaming wet from the road. He stepped out wearing a long coat, carrying a briefcase, his movements calm and deliberate. He waved toward the house, and Karen opened the door before Mia could stop her. "John," she said warmly, "come in, you must be freezing." Holden smiled, his eyes glancing briefly at Mia before returning to Karen. "It's nothing a cup of coffee won't fix. How are you both holding up?" His voice was smooth, practiced, almost soothing. It reminded Mia of the way a hunter might speak to an animal before springing a trap. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table and began pulling out papers. "Just some forms, Buenos," he said. "Routine, but they need your signature." Harold's estate was a mess. He left so many loose ends. Karen sat with him, chatting lightly, grateful for his help. Mia stayed by the window pretending to look outside, though she was watching his every move. Every gesture seemed intentional. The way his eyes swept the room, the way his hand lingered near the cabinet where the videotapes had been stacked. She noticed how he kept glancing toward the corner near the fireplace, as if sensing what lay beneath the floorboards. "So," he said finally, leaning back, "how are you settling in here? The house isn't too much for you?" "It's fine," Karen replied. "We're just trying to get through everything. Mia's been helping a lot." He smiled at the girl, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's good. Your uncle would have liked that. He always said you were the curious one." The words made her tense. There was a flicker of knowledge in his tone, a subtle test, as if he were probing to see how much she knew. She forced a polite nod, her palms slick with sweat. Dinner passed in uneasy civility. Holden complimented the food, told stories about Harold's eccentric habits, laughed at his own memories. But beneath the warmth of his voice was an undertone of control, like every word was meant to lull them into comfort. When Karen excused herself to fetch dessert, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You've been spending time in the garage, haven't you?" Mia froze. "What?" He smiled faintly. "I noticed the lock was new. Your mother said you were cleaning out the place. Brave of you. Harold didn't like anyone near his workroom." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "It's just junk. Old machines and tapes." His expression softened, but his eyes didn't. "Of course, just old junk." He picked up his coffee cup, sipping it slowly, then set it down with deliberate care. "Still, I'd be careful with what you find out there." Harold wasn't well at the end. Sometimes a dying man leaves behind more questions than answers. Before she could respond, Karen returned with the dessert, breaking the tension. Holden smiled again, his charm instantly restored, as if nothing had happened. But Mia could see it now, the calculation behind the kindness, the precision of a man who had spent decades managing his lies. When he finally stood to leave, he thanked them both for dinner, his coat already draped over his arm. "You're sure you're all right here?" he asked, pausing at the doorway. "If the power goes out again, call me. These old lines can be dangerous." "We'll be fine," Karen said. He nodded. "Good night, then." Mia watched from the window as he walked to his car. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, the silhouette of his head visible through the windshield, unmoving. After a full minute, the headlights blinked on, and the car rolled slowly back down the drive until the night swallowed it whole. Karen sighed behind her. "You see? Such a kind man, always looking out for us." Mia said nothing. Her pulse hadn't slowed. She turned away from the window, pretending to tidy the table. "I need to get some air," she murmured, and before her mother could answer, she slipped outside. The night was sharp with cold. She stood under the porch, staring at the wet gravel where his tires had been. The marks were still there, imprinted deep into the earth. Her mind replayed the footage from the tape. The same man, the same calm posture, standing in the dark beside a lifeless body. She needed help, but there was no one she could turn to. The nearest neighbor lived miles away, and the local police, if Harold's words were true, were part of the same network Holden had once controlled. There was only one person she might trust, and he was gone. A movement upstairs made her look up. Through the curtain of rain, she saw her mother's shadow pass across the bedroom window. At least she was safe for now. Mia stepped off the porch, letting the cold air clear her thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then silence swallowed everything again. She turned back toward the house, ready to lock the doors for the night. But as she reached the steps, she froze. The front door stood half open, swaying slightly in the wind. She was sure she closed it behind her. The light from inside spilled weakly onto the porch. "Mama?" she called softly. No answer. She stepped inside, every sense alert. The kitchen lights flickered once, casting long shadows across the floor. Then a sound from upstairs, a sharp crash, followed by her mother's scream. Mia dropped everything and ran, her heart hammering so hard it drowned out her thoughts. She reached the landing, breathless. "Mom!" she shouted. The hallway was empty, but the bedroom door stood ajar. Inside, the lamp had fallen, glass shattered across the rug. The curtains whipped in the wind from the open window. Her mother lay on the floor beside the bed, pale and unconscious. Mia knelt beside her, shaking her gently. "Mom, wake up, please." There was no blood, no sign of injury, just a faint mark on her wrist, as if someone had grabbed her. She looked toward the window. The rain was coming in sideways, cold against her skin. Below, the yard was dark and empty. Whoever had been here was gone. Downstairs, the television turned on by itself. The sound startled her, a burst of static that filled the air like a scream. She ran down, still clutching her mother's hand, and stopped dead. On the screen, flickering in black and white, was the same image she had seen on the hidden tape Holden in the factory yard, staring toward the camera. But this time, the footage was different. It showed a second scene, someone breaking into the garage, searching through boxes, moving with frantic speed. Her uncle had filmed his own killer. Mia's breath came fast and shallow. The tape must have triggered automatically. Harold had rigged it somehow, left it as a message for whoever found the truth. She reached to shut it off, but before she could, the image shifted again, to the interior of this very house. The date in the corner read 2 days before Harold's death, and there he was, Holden standing in the same kitchen, pouring something into a cup of tea. Her uncle entered the frame moments later, moving slowly, tired. They spoke briefly, no audio, but when Harold turned away, Holden placed the cup in his hand. A few minutes later, Harold collapsed out of sight. The screen froze. The tape ejected itself with a mechanical click. Mia stared at it, unable to breathe. Then she looked down at her mother, still unconscious, and whispered the only thing she could think. "He killed him, and now he's coming for us." The lights flickered once more, then went out completely. The darkness rushed in like water through a broken wall. And in that silence, the sound of distant footsteps echoed outside the door, slow and deliberate, just as they had the night before. The first light of morning broke through the clouds in fractured streaks, glinting weakly off the wet ground, and the glass shards scattered across the bedroom floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the air itself was listening. Mia sat beside her mother's bed, holding a cold washcloth to Karen's forehead. Her mother's breathing was steady now, though her face was pale, her pulse faint but even. The night blurred in her memory, Holden's visit, the crash upstairs, the flickering images on the television, and she could no longer tell where fear ended and reality began. But one thing she knew with absolute clarity: the man who had killed her uncle had been inside their house. When Karen finally stirred, she looked around in confusion. "What happened?" she murmured. "You fainted," Mia said softly, helping her sit up. "You're all right now." Karen frowned, her gaze unfocused. "I remember hearing something downstairs. A noise, and then—" She trailed off, touching her wrist where faint bruises had already formed. Her eyes met Mia's. "Was someone here?" Mia hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it was just the wind." She didn't want to frighten her more. Not yet. There would be time later to tell her everything. But for now, Karen needed calm, not the truth's weight. When her mother fell back into a light sleep, Mia went downstairs. The house looked the same as always, yet something about it felt altered, emptied of warmth. The air smelled faintly of rain and ozone. The television screen was black again, but the tape still sat halfway ejected in the player, as though waiting for her to finish what had begun. Her hands trembled as she touched it. The edges of the cassette were slick with condensation, almost like sweat. Outside, the morning fog lingered low over the yard. No tire marks this time. Whoever had come in the night had left without a trace. The stillness was almost too clean, too deliberate. Mia turned the cassette over and noticed something she hadn't before. Etched faintly into the plastic, beneath the manufacturer's label, were two words scratched in with a blade. Camera room. She looked around and then toward the door that led to the garage. A thought hit her. Harold had recorded everything. What if there was more than one hidden system? What if the garage wasn't just a place for tapes, but a surveillance hub? Her stomach knotted as she crossed the yard. The garage door resisted at first, the old lock swollen from the rain, but then it gave way with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the faint scent of metal and oil. The gray light filtering through the small window gave everything an underwater haze. She set the tape down on the workbench and began searching along the walls. She tapped the wooden panels, listening for a hollow echo. At first there was nothing. Then behind a shelf stacked with boxes of film reels, she heard it, a dull, empty sound. Pulling the shelf aside, she found a narrow metal panel with 4 screws. The screwdriver lay conveniently nearby, as though Harold had left it for her. When she pried the panel off, her breath caught. Behind it was a small compartment, filled with wires, monitors, and an old recording unit with blinking red lights. Dozens of cables ran from it along the walls, disappearing through tiny holes drilled into the house's foundation. Harold hadn't just recorded his research, he'd been watching everything. The garage, the kitchen, even the front porch were visible on the miniature screens, frozen in grainy still frames. One monitor flickered and came to life. The image was dark at first, then sharpened into the view of the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read 2 nights ago. Mia watched in numb silence as the feed played out. It showed her and her mother sitting at the table, drinking tea, unaware of the faint movement visible in the reflection of the window, someone walking past outside, pausing just beyond the porch light. She fast-forwarded. The screen jumped to another angle, the living room. This time she saw Holden. He moved quietly, confidently, searching through drawers, glancing toward the stairs as if listening. The date and timestamp showed this was from the night before Harold's death. He poured something into a teacup, the same scene she'd glimpsed on the tape that had played the night before. But now the footage continued. After Harold collapsed, Holden didn't leave. He calmly wiped the cup clean, placed it in the sink, and looked directly into the camera. For several seconds, he just stared, his expression unreadable, before reaching up and covering the lens with his hand. The feed cut out. Mia leaned back, shaking. Every instinct screamed at her to get out of that house. But she couldn't, not yet. Not until she had everything. The proof was here, and Harold had made sure it would outlive him. She gathered the tapes, the photos, and the small recording unit itself, stuffing them into a canvas bag she found under the workbench. When she stepped outside, the fog was thinning, the first rays of sunlight breaking through. For a moment, she felt almost calm. Then the faint sound of a car engine drifted through the stillness. It was distant, but approaching. She froze, heart pounding, listening as the hum grew louder. Closer. Tires crunched on gravel. Holden's black sedan appeared at the end of the drive. He parked near the gate and stepped out slowly, his posture relaxed, as though he were simply dropping by again for another friendly visit. Even from a distance, Mia could see the careful confidence in his movements, the same calm mask he'd worn at dinner. Panic clawed at her chest. She turned and bolted back toward the house, slamming the door shut and locking it. Through the window, she saw him pause by the porch, his eyes lifting toward the second floor, toward her mother's room. He knocked lightly, once, twice. "Mia," his voice called, soft, measured. "We need to talk." She backed away from the door, clutching the bag. He knocked again, a little harder. "I know you've been looking through Harold's things. You shouldn't have done that. Those tapes, those are dangerous misunderstandings." His tone was patient, almost kind. "Let me take them off your hands before anyone gets hurt." Her breath caught. "He's lying," she whispered to herself. The knocking turned into pounding. "Open the door, Mia. I don't want to force it." From upstairs came her mother's voice, weak but panicked. "Who is it?" "Mom, stay upstairs," Mia shouted, but even as she spoke, the doorknob rattled violently. She ran to the garage door that connected to the house and dragged the heavy tool chest in front of it. The pounding grew louder, then suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. She turned toward the back door, intending to slip out through the yard and run for help, but before she could reach it, a shadow moved past the window. She froze. The glass shattered inward as Holden's arm smashed through, grabbing the latch. He pushed the frame open and stepped inside, brushing the glass from his sleeve, his expression calm as ever. "Mia," he said quietly, taking a step forward, "put the bag down." She backed away, clutching it to her chest. "You killed him." He sighed, his voice almost gentle. "Your uncle was sick. He imagined things, created enemies out of thin air. You're too young to understand how deep his paranoia went. Give me the tapes, and we'll forget this ever happened." "Stay away from us," she said, her voice trembling. Holden took another step. "Mia, listen to me. He wanted to destroy lives mine, your mother's, his own. Don't let his madness spread." The sound of a police siren in the distance made him freeze. He turned his head slightly toward the road. Mia didn't wait. She hurled the nearest object, a heavy wrench from the counter, at him. It struck his shoulder, and he stumbled just long enough for her to grab the bag and run through the kitchen toward the back door. Outside, the world blurred into motion-cold air, wet grass, her feet pounding the ground. Behind her, she heard him shout her name, his voice sharp now, stripped of all pretense. She reached the end of the drive just as two police cars turned the corner, lights flashing. Holden stopped where he stood, realizing the trap had closed. The officers emerged, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Mia backed away as they surrounded him. He didn't resist. He simply raised his hands, his eyes meeting hers with a look that was neither anger nor regret, but something in between, something almost proud. Hours later at the station, the detectives sifted through the contents of her bag. The recordings, the photos, the videos, all matched the cold cases Harold had referenced in his notes. The tape showing Holden poisoning Harold was irrefutable. His arrest sent shockwaves through the town. For decades, no one had believed the stories Harold told. Now every word was vindicated. When it was finally over and the last of the officers left, Mia returned home with her mother. The house was quiet again, the storm truly gone this time. She unpacked the bag slowly, setting the recovered tapes on the workbench in the garage. Among them, one caught her eye, a smaller cassette she hadn't noticed before, wrapped in a strip of brown paper. On it, written in Harold's careful hand, were the words, "If the truth is found, play this." She hesitated, then slid it into the player. The screen flickered, and there he was. Uncle Harold, smiling for the first time. His voice was soft, almost warm. "If you're watching this, Mia, it means the truth is out. You did what I couldn't. Thank you." He looked down for a moment, his smile fading into something more solemn. "Remember, truth doesn't die. It waits. It always waits. And sometimes it chooses the right person to find it." The screen went dark. For a long time she sat there, the only sound the faint hum of the player. Then she took a blank cassette from the shelf, placed it beside the others, and picked up a marker. On its spine, she wrote the words that had started it all. "Watch only after my death." She placed it carefully on the shelf and turned off the light. As she stepped out of the garage, the red recording light on the small camera in the corner blinked once, then went still, as if the story, at last, had decided to rest. If you enjoyed this story and want more mysteries that keep you guessing until the very last second, don't forget to subscribe. There's a new story coming soon that will shock you even more. Hit like, share this video with your friends, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And whatever you do, don't miss the next one. The truth is never finished.